is where I noticed that the recycling truck came along, and when they stopped outside the house, they put all the bottles in one bit, all the plastics in another bit, and so on. Come home to Wellington, and the bin just gets tipped into the same vehicle, and I just wonder how it's then separated to prevent people putting in the wrong things. It just seems to me that we're separating at source. That's really good. But just putting it all in one pile, is that going to change?
No. So at this point, the system curbside collection for recycling in Tamaki is the commingled. So we just, similar to Wellington, we just have the one recycling bin, and all the different materials go into that one bin. We're fortunate here that we have the material recycling facility where all that commingled recyclables get sent to this facility, and we have machines and people there who are sorting through the waste. We really need the support, from the public and that buy-in initially.
We're going to have to leave that there, Lorraine. It's a topic for another time. Peter, thank you for that. Nalini, wonderful to have both your company on today's program. And a quick shout out to Community Cat Cyril and Penthouse Cinema in Wellington's cat, and Forest Lake Gardens Independent Living Retirement cat too.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. And haere aki nei, a big score for a group of top athletes. This one is on the legal arena, and it could change the way they're paid and treated. We talked to the Olympic great who got it over the finish line. Mahe Drysdale is live. A parliamentary infringement for the police minister who's forced to apologise after someone pulls rank. Buy now, pay later schemes have the Commerce Minister concerned. So what does he plan to do about it? And the puzzling sport of jigsaw racing. It is a thing. Could you piece it together under pressure? We speak to one of the competitors. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. It could be years before a collective agreement is agreed between top rowers and cyclists and High Performance Sport New Zealand, despite a landmark employment ruling in the athletes' favour. The Employment Relations Authority has ruled HPSNZ is obligated to engage in collective bargaining with a group of the rowers and cyclists who have formed the Athletes Cooperative. Olympic rower champion Mahe Drysdale, who co-chairs the group, says the decision is only the start of a long process.
We're not going in with any fixed ideas. Obviously we've gone down this process because we believe that we should be looked after, like every other employee of HPSNZ, and that's been the sort of elephant in the room, that everyone's looked after apart from the athletes.
The government plans to meet with the Commerce Commission to discuss the use of buy now, pay later schemes for purchasing basic items like groceries. Some people have been using Prezi cards to do their weekly supermarket shop. The Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Andrew Bailey, says he's concerned by this trend.
I've obviously heard of that practice. The big question is, how do you stop people from converting buy now, pay later schemes into other types of currency, which is effectively what they're doing? I'm meeting with the Commerce Commission, and I'll certainly be talking to them about it.
And you can hear the full interview with Andrew Bailey shortly on Checkpoint. The Police Minister says he was simply trying to illustrate the challenges around police recruitment and retention when he told Parliament it would take 3 years to meet the government's recruitment target. Mark Mitchell today corrected the record, saying he made a mistake.
In the House yesterday, I highlighted the challenges that the incoming government is going to have to deliver the 500 additional police officers this term. What I should have done, which is a term, what I should have done is restated very clearly that the coalition agreement means that we're committing to delivering those 500 in the first 2 years of this term.
Mark Mitchell says the Prime Minister asked him to make the commitment clear. The Fire and Emergency Boss for Taranaki has paid tribute to the volunteer firefighters who were first on the scene of a fiery two-vehicle crash south of Eltham early today. 2 people are confirmed dead, but the police aren't yet sure of the number of people in one of the vehicles. Area Commander Clive Lennox says its crews from Eltham and Hawera were met by horrific scenes.
This sort of thing, of course, in small communities is a real challenge, so a lot of gratitude to our volunteers who respond to these sorts of incidents 24/7.
South Taranaki Mayor Phil Nixon says events like these can send small communities like Eltham reeling. Wellington's rates could go up by more than 15% to help fix the city's failing water pipe network. At a policy workshop today, council staff recommended a $1.1 billion water infrastructure upgrade, with $122 million of that to be spent on introducing water meters. If approved, the change would slow down the implementation of the Golden Mile upgrade. Staff say the changes to Lambton Quay and Willis Street would have to be done later than previously proposed. Councillors will vote on the draft long-term plan on February the 15th. The Labour Party says the use of an image of an American influencer charged with rape and human trafficking in one of its Instagram posts was an innocent mistake. A screenshot of an article about leader Chris Hipkins' comments at Ratana last week was posted with a gif of influencer Andrew Tate and the word correct. Mr Hipkins says a staff member simply searched the word correct and didn't know who Andrew Tate was.
They're quite mortified now to know who the person was that was used in that GIF. It does not in any way reflect the views of the person who did the post. And so I think a good reminder for people to know what they're posting, and certainly something that we'll be taking steps to avoid happening again in the future.
To sport now, and High Performance Sport New Zealand says it's both surprised and concerned by an Employment Relations Authority ruling against it and is considering an appeal. As earlier reported, the authority has found that HPSNZ is obligated to engage in collective bargaining with a group of the country's top rowers and cyclists who have formed a group called the Athletes Cooperative. HPSNZ had argued unsuccessfully that it shouldn't have to negotiate a collective agreement as it has no formal employment relationship with athletes. It says it's now considering its next move, which could be to take an appeal to the Employment Court. Former Silver Ferns captain Gina Crampton has joined the Sydney-based Giants as a training partner for the upcoming Super Netball season. It makes her the third former Silver Fern to sign with an Australian franchise for this season, along with Sam Winders and El Temu. Renowned Australian Rugby League coach Wayne Bennett is keen to coach the Kiwis. The Brisbane Courier Mail is reporting that Bennett, who currently coaches the NRL side, the Dolphins, has applied for the vacant Kiwis job following the departure of Michael Maguire. An appointment is due to be made by end of next month. And Arsenal are up to second on the English Premier League table after beating Nottingham Forest 2-1. Everton have slipped into the relegation zone after a 0-0 draw with Fulham. Koinanga Pitupitu Kōrero, that's the news.
Confusion over police recruitment.
He is walking back on the coalition agreement that he will deliver 500 additional police within 2 years.
We have committed to 500 additional police officers over the term of this government, which, yes, is 3 years.
It's just a shambles. It's a bit humiliating for Mark Mitchell.
I think Mark could have expressed himself better.
Our chiefs of staff have talked overnight, and we have seriously worked on this matter.
Our commitment is to deliver 500 more police officers in the first 2 years of this term of Parliament. That remains as it's set out in our coalition agreement.
Untangling the big issues. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland to Taumarunui, including Bay of Plenty and Taupo, mainly fine. Isolated showers this afternoon and evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy. Showers clearing this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow afternoon and evening. Taranaki to Kapiti Coast, including Taihape, mainly fine. Cloud increasing tomorrow evening with a few showers in Taranaki and south of Palmerston North. Wellington and Waitangi, partly cloudy, isolated showers in Waitangi. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, fine in Nelson, cloudy periods in Bulla and Westland with a chance of a shower today and a few showers there tomorrow. Fiordland, rain developing this evening, clearing for a time tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, isolated showers mainly during the afternoons and evenings, possibly heavy and thundery tomorrow about Canterbury and eastern Otago. For Southland, fine weather but scattered rain developing tonight. And looking at Kohu, Chatham Islands, periods of rain easing to a few showers tomorrow evening. It is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at 20 past 5. Kia ora rā e ho. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A big win for a team of top New Zealand athletes could see them score the same rights, privileges and pay as employees. The Employment Relations Authority has found in favour of the elite rowers and cyclists in what has been a long-running disagreement with High Performance Sport New Zealand. The ERA has found the government agencies legally obliged to engage in collective bargaining with the Athletes Cooperative, led by Olympic great Mahe Drysdale. High Performance Sport had rejected earlier attempts to hash out a collective agreement on the basis that it does not employ athletes. In-depth sports correspondent Dana Johansson joins us now to talk us through the ruling. This is really interesting. What has been the response from the two parties about today's decision?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say there's a real sense of vindication among the Athletes Cooperative that the authority have ruled that the action the union undertook, sort of going back way back to July 2022 when they served notice on High Performance Sport New Zealand, that that action was valid when it sought to initiate collective bargaining. While it's a victory on a very narrow piece of employment law, it is a significant win. What it means now is that High Performance Sport are compelled to come to the table and hash out an agreement, a proper collective agreement that will provide the country's top rowers and cyclists with enhanced rights and protections. I guess there's also acknowledgement, though, that while this one's gone their way, it is sort of the first step in the journey, and now the hard work begins to sort of hash out an agreement. High performance sport bosses, as you can imagine, are probably less enthused about today's decision. The government funding agency issued a short statement this afternoon that said it's surprised and concerned by the decision, and that suggests possibly an appeal is on the cards. If that's the case, it would head to the Employment Court.
There has been a number of reports relating to conditions and pay for some elite athletes. So I'm wondering, when there's talk of protections, what kind of protections are the Athletes Cooperative seeking for its members? Yeah, pay is absolutely part of it. It's not just about sort of winning big, it's about financial stability for the athletes. The other big part of it is really around the performance culture and the environment. We've seen a stack of reviews that have come out over the last 6 years that have highlighted some of the toxic behaviours in those environments. So it's about being a part of that, being a part of the design and the system and addressing some of those issues, using their experience and IP to really ensure that the design of the system is a proper performance culture. And could this case have some broader implications? Because it's not just this group of 60 who will be interested in this, and other government-funded high-performance programs will, I'm sure, be looking at it.
Absolutely, and I would suggest that's probably why there's cause for concern among high-performance sport at the moment on today's ruling. It could really pave the way for other athlete groups to bring similar claims and potentially upend how the high-performance system is funded in New Zealand. Now the precedent has been established, I'd imagine that other groups will seek to ensure any conditions that the rowers and cyclists secure as part of their collective agreement would then be replicated across other sports.
Yeah, so that statement that you mentioned from High Performance Sport, exceptionally short, right? And just sort of signalled the fact that they're not entirely happy and a bit worried. There's any clues to what concerns them about it?
I would imagine it'll be around the precedent it sets. I think they've said before that they clearly consider our kind of employee or contractor model to be unworkable and too expensive, and therefore they say that it would impact the number of athletes they could fund and thereby impact athlete welfare even further. So they're sort of considering the wider implications of it.
It's going to be interesting to watch the next moves. Thank you for that, Dana Johansson there. It is 11 minutes after 5. 5. Interested in your thoughts on that one. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Collective bargaining for those elite athletes is, it's going to go ahead now, according to that ruling from the ERA. Kia amo tonu mai, do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Police Minister has had to correct the record in Parliament after wrongly pushing out the deadline for one of the Coalition's commitments. In a rapid backtrack, Mark Mitchell has now recommitted to training an extra 500 police officers in 2 years, just a day after he said it would take 3. Our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch has this report.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to make a personal statement.
A ministerial mea culpa as Mark Mitchell flip-flops on his flip-flop.
The government's policy is to deliver 500 new police in the first 2 years of the term.
That is in line with what is clearly stated in National's coalition agreement with New Zealand First, 500 police in 2 years. But that is not what the Police Minister said on Breakfast Television on Monday.
Realistically, 500 new staff over the next 3 years is what we're aiming for.
3 years, not 2. And again in Parliament yesterday, he confirmed that extended deadline, pointing out the difficulties he had learned police were having with recruitment.
They can't fill current recruit wings. The Australians are here recruiting our police officers. And we've got senior police officers that are getting ready to retire.
The comments prompted confusion behind the scenes and some urgent conversations. First, one between National and New Zealand First, and then another between the Prime Minister and Mark Mitchell. Today, a quick backtrack and a reversion to the 2-year timeframe.
I should have been clearer.
The Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, denies his party was pulled into line by the Deputy PM and New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters.
No, Winston Peters and I are very clear about the goal. Mark Mitchell may have mixed his messages a little bit yesterday, but he's very clear, we're all very clear about what the goal is.
This is going to be a tidy coalition. When things go slightly awry, we get them back on track real fast.
The mishap illustrates one of the difficulties of operating in a coalition, with different parties and different positions, a point Labour knows all too well from its time working with New Zealand First.
The government is a shambles. They don't seem to really be talking properly to each other, and I also think that National clearly didn't pay much attention to what it was they were signing up to when they signed the coalition agreements.
It all leaves the question of whether the goal is even achievable, given the Police Minister's clear reservations.
I think it's going to be challenging, but I think we can do it.
We set stretching goals, we have ambition, we want to be, make sure that we go after big goals. Occasionally we won't hit goals, I get that, but we are determined to hit this one.
No wriggle room now. That commitment is in black and white, New Zealand First colours. Come 2 years' time, there will be plenty of people checking the record.
And the Commerce Minister's worried buy now, pay later schemes are too easy to access when people are already in debt. But for now, he's monitoring the situation. A recent trend has seen people using the services to buy Prezi cards and then use those to shop for essentials like groceries. The likes of Afterpay, Lay-Buy and Zip Pay allow people to buy goods or services now but pay for them later in a series of instalments over several weeks. There's no interest charged, but people can face penalties for defaulting on payments. Right now, there are no cross-checks on how many debts buy now, pay later customers have when they sign on. Regulations tweaked by the previous government come into force in September, but some budget services are worried they don't go far enough. And Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Andrew Bailey, has concerns.
The two big issues I've got is the number of buy now, pay later schemes that people can enter into, and that obviously leads to some problems. And the second element is the tests around affordability and whether they're appropriate.
So are you going to crack down on those elements?
Look, we're just monitoring at the moment, and obviously the regulatory changes that will come into September, we'll just see whether they work. But if I see more things happening, and I've got a meeting with the Commerce Commission shortly, I'll just make sure we've got a watching brief on it.
Yeah, but users are exploiting loopholes at the moment in buy now, pay later to convert purchases into supermarket vouchers to buy things like food, everyday groceries. Are you okay with that?
Well, yeah, that's what I was alluding to. I've obviously heard of that practice. The big question is, how do you stop people from converting buy now, pay later schemes into other types of currency, which is effectively what they're doing? But that's something that's just sort of emerged. As I said, I'm meeting with the Commerce Commission, and I'll certainly be talking to them about it.
But you've been aware of issues with buy now, pay later for a while. You've had a lot to say about it when you were in opposition. You were concerned that everyday items were being made accessible through buy now, pay later, not just luxuries, that people could accrue debt very quickly, no limit to the number of services they could sign up for. So why not act on it now?
Well, look, you've got to to act, you need to look at a systemic issue. Buy now, pay later schemes in the main seem to be okay. The issue is, as I said before, if you've got people who pile on lots of buy now, pay later schemes, I think that is an issue. That's certainly an issue that I'm trying to get some advice on. But the other side of it is whether, in fact, people are doing sufficient affordability checks. And, that's been an ongoing debate. And I'm just working my way through it. But as I say, there's new regulations coming into force in September this year. So that's obviously going to address some of those issues.
But not all of them. So would you consider putting a cap on the number of buy now, pay later services that a person can access, and also introducing blanket credit or affordability assessments for those services?
Those are all things contemplating, but we haven't got to a final decision on it.
And how long do you think it will be before you do decide?
Look, as I say, we just need to see how widespread this practice is. Obviously, there's been reports in the media about it, but I just want to see whether it's a real systemic issue or some people are just using it as a mechanism. But the real issue is we've got a cost of living crisis and people are looking for credit from any sources they can get. And the buy now, pay later is one of those avenues where they can get access to credit and obviously build up a debt profile that's really unattractive. So if that becomes really a systemic issue, that particular practice you're talking about, then we'll look to clamp down on it.
Are you less concerned about buy now, pay later now that you are in government than when you were in opposition?
No, I'm not. But I do know there are new regulations coming into force in September.
Yeah, brought in by the old government, right? And I mean, you've put out media comment on it before, the perils of buy now, pay later, and listing your concerns about all the things I've just listed to you now. You're not going to act on them now that you're in a position to?
No, I'm not saying I'm not going to act on them, but there are two particular issues I'm concerned about, which is the amount or the number of buy now, pay later schemes that people can enter into without sufficient checks. But the second thing is whether when you do enter into any buy now, pay later scheme, whether in fact there are sufficient checks around whether the customer has the ability to repay that loan as they fall due. And I think those are the two big things. Obviously the government looked at a cap at $500 as one option. There's various ways of looking at it. And I will monitor it, and if I need to change it, I'll certainly be talking to people and make that change. But in the meantime, we're just looking at it and looking at some of the options around what we might do.
And that is the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Andrew Bailey. Interested in your thoughts on that one. 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Do there need to be more checks and balances when it comes to buy now, pay later? 5:20 and you were Checkpoint on RNZ National. Already getting feedback from you on this ERA decision about a group of elite athletes who have now won the right to bargain collectively with High Performance Sport New Zealand. This listener says, like all workers, elite athletes deserve the right to bargain collectively and improve their working conditions. Sport New Zealand needs to suck it up and come to the bargaining table. Interested in your thoughts on that one too, and anything else you've heard on the programme this evening. Homai o whakaaro, 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to go to the headlines now. Anea Evi, mena pits a kōrero.
The Employment Relations Authority says High Performance Sport New Zealand is legally obliged to engage in collective bargaining with elite rowers and cyclists. But Olympic rowing champion Mahe Drysdale, who co-chairs the Athletes Cooperative, says it could be years before a collective agreement is agreed. Police Minister Mark Mitchell has today recommitted to the Coalition's agreement to train an additional 500 police officers within 2 years. Yesterday, he told Parliament it would take 3 years and says he was trying to illustrate the challenges around police recruitment. He's now corrected the record. The government plans to meet with the Commerce Commission to discuss buy now, pay later schemes. Commerce Minister Andrew Bailey is concerned they're too easy to access when people are in debt and there are no cross-checks on how much people owe when they sign up. He told Checkpoint he's monitoring the schemes. COVID rapid antigen tests will now be available free until at least the end of June. They had been due to run out next month. Health Minister Shane Reti will not commit to free tests for the second half of the year, saying he'll take advice from officials. And temperatures have hit 30 degrees and above in parts of the country, and there are heat alerts for Auckland and Pekuiti. The hottest place has been Marsden Point, which hit 32 degrees. Met Service is forecasting cooler temperatures nationally over the next few days. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic around the country. In Auckland, there was a breakdown on State Highway 16 heading into the city eastbound, just before Great North Road off-ramp. That has been cleared, but there may be residual delays there. In Taranaki, State Highway 3 at Eltham is now open following a big clean-up operation at a serious crash this morning. And in Southland, after a crash this afternoon on State Highway 6 at Winton, the road is closed between Brandon and Meldrum streets. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 20 to 6.
Kia ora rā, Eho. The days of some elite athletes representing Aotearoa on the international stage for the glory of it and a grant, if they're lucky, could soon be over. The Employment Relations Authority has found in favour of a group of top rowers and cyclists in what has been a long-running disagreement with High Performance Sport New Zealand. The ERA has found the government agency is legally obliged to engage in collective bargaining with the athletes' cooperative. High Performance Sport had rejected earlier attempts to hash out a collective agreement on the basis it does not employ the athletes. Olympic great Mahe Drysdale spearheaded the case for the athletes' cooperative and joins us now. Kia ora, Mahe. What's the reaction been among the athletes?
Good afternoon. I think a little bit of relief. We've been waiting 18 months since we issued the notice to collective bargain. So, this is a really not a win for us, more just the start of the process that we've been hoping to be involved in for the last 18 months.
As a step forward and a victory, though, what is the significance of it?
I think the significance is that we're vindicated in choosing collective bargaining, and now High Performance Sport need to come to the table and talk to us, and this is all we've been trying to do at this stage, and obviously being compelled to do it, they now have to sit down and talk to us, which is very pleasing and all we've really wanted along the whole process.
Why do you need collective bargaining for these athletes?
So the main reason we chose collective bargaining is it balances the power. So there's no power imbalance, and it's been a long journey, I guess, and the athletes have not been treated in our view, with as much respect, and we don't have any input into how the system operates. We're told how it works and what to do, and we just go and train and hopefully perform. But we want to be involved in making the program and the system better. And obviously there's been a few unfortunate incidents in high performance sport, and we believe that we can be part of that solution in fixing those.
The Heron report highlighted some of the issues and athletes' concerns, trying to work while trying to train full-time. Grants, some of them were given, worked out at less than the minimum wage, and there were mental health stresses. So what is the ultimate goal here that you wish to achieve?
Yeah, I think the ultimate goal is an environment that we are proud of, and that we're part of making those decisions, and that ultimately we want some of the responsibility and be a partner in making decisions that affect us on a daily basis. So,
but you want fair pay too, don't you, Mahe? Because
oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
that'd be nice. But there is constraints in the system, and we're well aware of that. So that's part of this process is trying to find what is fair and what is reasonable.
We'll talk about the constraints a bit more in a minute, but do you think there has been a bit of a mentality where if you are a top athlete, then the glory of representing your country in a grant should be enough to keep you going? Has that kind of been the way it's been looked at?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, all of us are very lucky to be able to represent our country and you know, perform on the world stage. But in saying that, why shouldn't we be treated like the 100 staff between Sport New Zealand and High Performance Sport New Zealand that are on 100k a year plus? So, you know, why are the athletes second-class citizens in that process when we're delivering the results? So, yeah, absolutely. It's you know, I think there is an imbalance there, and this is hopefully going to help resolve that.
Let's talk a bit more about that, Mahe. The employees at High Performance Sport New Zealand, I've had a look at their annual report. More than 55 of the people employed there are making between $150,000 and $450,000 a year, and more than 100 are making between $100K and $150K. That's some big salaries there. They're not athletes. What do you think about that imbalance?
Yeah, and you know, we want to pay people well, right? And that's how we get the best people. But, you know, to put that in perspective, the most an athlete can earn is $70,000, and that's for people like Lisa Carrington and Emma Twigg, who are Olympic gold medalists. That's the limit that you can earn as a high performance athlete in the system. So, you know, we do believe that that's wrong, and that we can help remedy that.
So why is there money for them, but not money for the people who are going out, you know, putting New Zealand on the world stage?
Well, you know, it's, again, there is constraints in the system, but yeah, again, I think it's just about prioritising where that money goes, and we believe that there should be more attention paid to the athletes and the conditions, and you know, because you know, we're very fortunate to have the success that we are. But, you know, the issue that we've got at the moment is, as an athlete, we don't have an option to go and row for Australia or, you know, go somewhere else in the world, because we're born in New Zealand and we want to represent New Zealand. And, you know, they know that we don't have any other options if we want to represent our country at the Olympics.
We're running short of time now, Mahe, but I'm wondering, is this the first, signal to the government as a funder that they're going to have to find deeper pockets?
Yeah, that will be interesting in the process. Like, I don't want to say we're going to have more money, because I know our country is struggling with money at the moment. But, you know, we believe we can even under the current regime and the current funding, we can look after our athletes better.
Appreciate your time, Mahe. That's Mahe Drysdale, who spearheaded that case for the Athletes Cooperative. They are now, the court has ruled, can go into collective bargaining with High Performance Sport New Zealand. Thoughts on that one, please? 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 57 of the people employed at High Performance Sport earn between $150,000 and $450,000. And I think Mahe was saying there that the top take home for one of the athletes for pay is in the $70,000 range. Does that seem fair? What do you reckon? Let us know. It is 29 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa in INA, ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio to talk all things business. Let's start with the financial services industry. It thinks the government has struck the right balance with proposed changes to cut red tape while still protecting consumers. Well, that sounds like some red tape right there, Nona.
It does, doesn't it? Well, there is an awful lot of red tape in the financial services sector. One of the things that's going to change, a big part of what the change is going to be, is the conduct of institutions, which was brought in. It's still coming into force. It's known as COFI. And it adds all sorts of layers of regulations, licensing, extra costs, and all sorts. And really, in the end, is it benefiting the consumers? That's hard to say, because it turns out the credit and contracts reform that came in 2021. It's known as the CCCFA, has seen a lot of consumers who should have got loans not get them because they didn't meet the threshold to qualify. And there was one example that the minister speaking to the Financial Services Council conference today said, which I think really brings it home, was that it used to take a couple hours to process, say, a small loan of maybe $500 or $1,000. It now takes 8 hours to do the same thing because there's so many boxes to tick. Now, the Financial Markets Authority are going to have a different and somewhat changing role in that their job is going to be to assist the industry to deliver the right outcomes rather than, have them come up with, say, 3 different licenses across an organization that maybe only has 5 employees. So there'll be, I guess, more like, when you get a driver's license and you've got endorsed to, drive a truck and maybe a motorcycle plus a car. It'll be more like that. So you'll have a license that covers more things. That's the idea. That's going to cut a lot of red tape, and that is going to save businesses money. And the idea is that if businesses are saving money, more people will come into the financial services sector, and consumers will be better off because they'll have a streamlined service. More people who deserve to have loans will get them. That's the idea behind all of these changes. It's going to be difficult to see how it all comes into force because it turns out we've got a new government with a big agenda of legislation. Parliament only sits so many times. We'll see what the priorities are, but expect some changes. There's also going to be a review of the Kiwi Saver Plan in the middle of the year. Don't know exactly what that's going to be about, but it's going to include things like, for example, how better to use some of the capital that New Zealanders invest in Kiwi Saver. So it's massive change in store in that space.
Let's talk about business confidence, not unrelated. It has improved, but the outlook is a little changed. What does the latest numbers tell you?
Well, people have a better outlook. Businesses are feeling a little bit more positive about 2024. I think the new government coming in help that. But the inflation expectations are not positive in the sense that that's what the Reserve Bank's going to be very concerned about. Expectations when it comes to inflation are incredibly important. If people's expectations are for inflation to remain at this time, 4.3%, that's not what the Reserve Bank wants to hear. It doesn't want to hear that retailers are planning to raise prices. No. Doesn't want to hear any of that. And that's what we're seeing with business confidence, that retailers are still expecting to raise prices. And for example, the other thing, and we've talked about this before, shipping costs are going up again because of the disruptions in the most critical ports in the world. We're talking about the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, etc. These are all concerns that are going to fuel up inflation yet again. And as long as inflation remains high, interest rates remain high, that's not good news for our economy. It's not great news for consumers. It's not good news for business. So that's why it's mixed. There you go, Lisa.
Okay, joggers on for the markets, please.
Well, unlike New Zealand, the Australian inflation came out at 4.1%. Which is pretty darn good. That's considering the September quarter was at 5.4. What did that do? Well, it means that the Reserve Bank in Australia is less likely to raise interest rates. And so that saw the New Zealand dollar rise against the Australian, 93.1 today, Australian, and 48.2 British pence. Now, the U.S. dollar story is still a story about what the U.S. Federal Reserve does overnight. We're going to hear what their rate increases are or aren't. And so we're sitting there at 61.1 U.S. cents, while the U.S. dollar is very, very strong. In the markets, we are down about 1/3%. That's what we've seen in Asia. So that's a 42-point drop to 11,872.
Thank you, Nona. Now, I'm no economist, but I do know a 2-for-1 is always a good deal. So people who are listening rather than watching, we've got a special guest in the control room. Johnny can probably help me with this. Nona's sister's here watching today. Hi, Nona's sister. 2 peas in a pod. There you go, Nona. Thank you so much for business.
My sister's really good for the economy. She's a tourist and she's spending money.
Fantastic to hear. Thank you, Nona. Okay, residents in parts of Tairāwhiti fear a future on their land is in jeopardy with silt dust making the place unlivable. Erosion has long been an issue in the Waiapu Valley north of Auckland, but with years of severe weather battering the region, silt dust is being whipped up in the wind, forcing people to shut themselves inside or flee. Lauren Crimp has the story.
The Waiapu River, running north from Ruatoria and out to sea, is described as the heart of Ngāti Porou, but it's choking from erosion. As the land crumbles, the resulting dust, whipped up by westerly winds, suffocates whānau and their whenua. Graham Atkins lives in the lower Waiapu Valley, and when the northwesterly blows, he packs up and leaves. There are about a dozen proper bad days each year, most in the dry summer, and worsening as wild weather leaves more thick layers of silt in its wake.
So much erosion has happened and it all deposits fresh silt. Yeah, when it dries out in the sun at this time of the year, the wind gets it all airborne and, really there's not much you can do about it.
On those bad days, he shuts up the house and heads south to a whānau home in Tokumaru Bay. He says the problem isn't going away, and some in his community are thinking of packing up more permanently.
It's going to be decades and decades in the making, so it's an issue that's big enough to, if people are thinking of, moving away, when you see the dust on a bad day, it'll probably be a big motivator to go, yep, we're out of here.
Graham Atkins says something's got to be done.
We need permanent tree cover on a lot of the steep land here. So our region, we need to have some real hard thinking about, the land use, because otherwise we won't have a future here. It's as simple as that.
About 25 kilometres upstream, Mareika Warmanhoven, who lives on the outskirts of Ruatoria, cops it too.
The most severe dust storm, it was like the outbacks of the Australian outbacks in a desert storm. And that was being downtown and the air was just filthy.
An environmentalist, she agrees with Graham Atkins that poor land use choices have caused the mess. Decades ago, steep erosion-prone land was cleared of bush to make way for farms and forestry, which doesn't do as good a job at keeping the ground intact. Mareika Warmanhoven says locals are now paying the price.
I actually get quite depressed because you can't hang your washing up, and it's just, I've been outside and mowing the lawns or something, and you can feel the grit on your teeth. What's happening to us here really is a health issue in my view.
Gisborne District Council says it was first contacted in 2020 about the dust storms, and air quality monitors were installed the same year. The monitoring shows the dust storms are intense but short-lived, so over a day it's not a health hazard. But the council says last year's weather has made matters worse, and it's considering what could be done about it. Further south, NIWA has been monitoring air quality in Hawke's Bay following Cyclone Gabrielle. Its principal air quality scientist, Guy Colson, says dust levels were high initially, but it quickly died down, for now. That could change.
We are likely to see more of these kind of events. And, if the geography of the region is of the kind where silt is going to get washed down valleys, then yes, it's entirely possible.
He says for those without respiratory issues, the dust isn't harmful, just unpleasant. Unpleasant enough that some whānau want out.
And that report on the silt in Waiapu Valley north of Auckland from Lauren Crimp. It is almost 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. To your feedback now, a lot of you have some thoughts on how athletes should be paid in this decision, which allows some of them to collectively bargain with High Performance Sport New Zealand. One of you is wondering, where is Raylene Castle? She is the boss of High Performance New Zealand. She should front up, this person says. Don't worry, we asked. She said no thanks. If High Performance Sport is the outfit that determines what high performance athletes are paid, then they are the employer, this person says. Pretty bloody simple, really. Another says, in terms of them negotiating a collective agreement, fair enough, but they should also have to declare other income, especially sponsorship, received. Mahe is bang on the money here. The management takes all the money, this person says. The athletes who win the accolades for our country get bugger all. And Jill's got in touch to say those high-performance sports salaries for middle managers are extraordinary, obscene even when compared with middle-range athletes without sponsors. 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Or you can send us a good old-fashioned email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines with Evie, ko Evie anō tēnei.
Olympic rowing champion Mahe Drysdale says a ruling that High Performance Sport New Zealand is obligated to engage in collective bargaining with a group of rowers and cyclists is only the start of a long process. The Employment Relations Authority has ruled in favour of the athletes' cooperative, but Mahe Drysdale says an agreement could be years away. The Prime Minister has reaffirmed the government's commitment to recruit 500 additional police officers in its first 2 years, as outlined in National's coalition agreement with New Zealand First. The Police Minister, Mark Mitchell, has had to correct the record after saying the government would deliver those officers over 3 years. Wellington City Council could hike up rates by more than 15% to pay for its leaky water pipe network. At a policy workshop today, council staff recommended a $1.1 billion water infrastructure upgrade in the long-term plan. Councillors will vote on the draft long-term plan on February the 15th. China has reported the death of a 63-year-old woman due to an infection of 2 combined strains of bird flu. The National Disease Control and Prevention Administration says the risk of human-to-human transmission is low and the woman had underlying health issues. And police have confirmed 2 deaths after this morning's 2-car crash south of Eltham in Taranaki. However, inquiries continue as it's not known how many people were in one of the vehicles. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic around the country in Southland after a crash this afternoon on State Highway 6 at Winton. The road is still closed northbound, as we understand it, between Brandon and Meldrum Streets. Our next news and weather are at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. Wellington City Council could hike rates by more than 15% to pay for its leaky water pipe network. Council staff estimate the city needs a $1.1 billion upgrade to water infrastructure. It means part of the Golden Mile upgrade could be delayed. Our reporter Nick James joins us now from the capital. Hi, Nick. What happened in the meeting today?
Yeah, the workshop was an opportunity for council staff to show councillors what they've been working on for the long-term plan, which is essentially their budget for the next decade. Council staff recommended a $1.1 billion upgrade for water. It also includes slowing down the construction of the Golden Mile upgrade, which would take away private vehicles between Lambton Quay and Courtney Place and provide pedestrian and cycling improvements. In order to fund the water infrastructure, the council is recommending delivering upgrades to Lambton Quay and Willis Street later than previously proposed. Changes to Courtney Place would go ahead on the current timeline for the plan. The changes would free up $16 million for water renewals in high priority areas. Now, the Golden Mile was previously part of the Let's Get Wellington Moving plan, but is now going ahead under Wellington City Council control after that project was scrapped late last year by the government. They are also looking at potentially increasing rates by up to 15.4%, but the council is saying that that is provisional.
And the Mayor, Tori Whānau, spoke to the media about the workshop. What does she have to say?
Tori Whānau says it's difficult to delay part of the Golden Mile upgrade, which she describes as her passion project, but she says she understands water has become a main priority for the council. Regarding rate increases, Whānau says previous councils have lowered rates, meaning water infrastructure requires so much more funding that needs to be paid for.
And what are the next steps for the long-term plan now?
On February 15, councillors will get around the table and vote on the proposals they want to keep in the draft long-term plan. Following that, the plan will go out for consultation for the public to have their say between April and May.
Thank you for the update. That is Nick James reporting live from Wellington there on the capital's water woes. 5:45 now. Ki amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's feared there may have been a mass poisoning of birds at a reserve on Auckland's North Shore. Up to 100 pigeons, ducks, sparrows and pukeko were found in varying stages of paralysis at Sherwood Reserve on Monday and Thursday evenings last week. Auckland Council is working with the Ministry of Primary Industries and the Department of Conservation to find out what happened. North Shore resident Virginia Nicol, who has been rescuing birds for the past decade, took 67 of the sick birds into her home to treat them. Now, she believes they were poisoned, and Virginia Nicol joins us now. Kia ora, Virginia. Can you tell us a bit more about the kind of condition these birds were in?
Kia ora. Yeah. So yes, as mentioned, they looked paralysed basically. Several of the birds were upside down, feet in the air. So people would have wrongly assumed that they had died already. The birds were still very much alive, but just in a state of probably hypothermia, where they were just not responsive to what was going on around them.
That sounds incredibly distressing. What do you think happened to them?
Well, my view, it's not proven. There's been no confirmation of what happened, is that it may have been a poison that was given to the birds. They were all in a very small location. They were all in the same sort of state at the time. And just given some of the observations from people in the community, it just appeared to be something that had progressed quite quickly for the birds.
And so what did you do to help them? 67, that's a lot to be taking home.
Well, they were split over the two different days, but it was a high amount. That was based on the fact that it was early evening. A lot of facilities are not operating at that time, so it was really more of an interim measure initially, just to get the birds through the night. With some poisoning, you can find that the birds will turn around quite quickly within 24 to 48 hours, and that's thankfully what had happened with these birds. Most of them recovered within 24 hours, and all of them had really recovered within the 2 days, ready for release. There were 10 birds that didn't make it, unfortunately, and they were pretty much close to death at the time of them being collected.
So, Virginia, those birds that didn't make it, have the council or DOC taken them to try and work out what's going on here?
Some samples were delivered to the laboratories to do some testing, just to rule out some of the main things we want to rule out is avian influenza, obviously, that we're concerned about hitting our shores, but also any other disease that may be going on around. So testing has been done, and I believe they are still investigating what's going on there. If
it is intentional poisoning, why would anyone do it?
That's hard to understand. I couldn't comment on that. It just seems very, I could not understand it myself.
Yeah, I mean, they're well used.
With the birds.
It's a well-used area, isn't it? Reserve. What happens in there? I mean, kids and families and what have you. What's the park used for?
Yeah, well, exactly. We're talking about the birds were in the kids' playground. I had a young child come up to me and go, "Excuse me, there's a bird over in the corner there." So this was impacting young families. This was impacting the people in the shops that came out to find these birds like that. So very distressing for people, very confronting for people. So really not a nice situation at all.
Appreciate your time and good on you for looking after them. That is Virginia Nicol there, who's been involved in looking after 67 sick birds. There's some suspicion that they may have been poisoned. DOC is looking into that situation. And speaking of puzzling situations, it's called Jigsaw racing, and it is actually a thing. Puzzle wizards will be on the start line at the Masters Games in Dunedin next week, competing for the joy of it and bragging rights, of course. There's team and individual events where competitors race the clock and each other to complete a jigsaw puzzle. Now, the cut-off time to complete the task is 9 hours for solo competitors. I don't know if I could concentrate for that long. And 4 for teams. It is going to be puzzler Tony Kennedy's first time playing in the big league. And she joins us now. Hi, Tony.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How did you get into this?
Well, obviously it just started as a bit of a hobby. I had shifted cities and had a little bit more time on my hands because I didn't really know many people. So I started puzzling and then it just went from there.
And how does this competition work? Do you know how big the puzzle is? Will you get a picture of it? What's the deal?
So it will be my first time competing, but I do know we're doing a 1,000-piece puzzle and we'll get a picture of it on the box and it's just open the box, get stuck in.
What's your strategy going to be?
Well, it depends on the puzzle because if it's a little bit of a busier print, we usually like to start with the edges and work in. But if it's like a focal point of the puzzle, we usually try to do that first and then work out.
This has caused great debate here in the office today, Tony, whether edges is the way to go or not.
I feel like it's kind of maybe general consensus among people who do puzzles that edges are not the way to go.
Really?
But I like doing edges. I feel like it just gives you a solid little frame to start with. So I always do start with edges.
So, I mean, how seriously are you taking this? Have you been training? Have you been timing yourself? How much puzzling have you been doing?
Definitely a lot more puzzling than usual. Not taking it too seriously though, but have been timing myself because I'm in teams. So me and my teammate Kimberly, we've been timing ourselves fairly regularly recently to see how well we can do.
So 1,000-piece puzzle. I mean, what's your kind of what's your average or your personal best?
My individual personal best is 4 hours, but us together, I think, just under 4 hours, but we're really aiming, we just want to get it done in the 4 hours.
Right, because would that be the big downer for you if your buzzer goes off and you don't have a complete puzzle?
Oh, totally. And we are just a team of 2, so teams go up to 4.
Mm.
So we are a little apprehensive about it, but I have faith in us. We'll go in confident. We'll be fine.
Right, well, let's talk about that because I'm wondering if you're better to have 2 rather than 4 because you might want to slap away other hands and don't you fight over the pieces and it could be calamity.
Yeah, well, I've never actually done a puzzle with more than one other person, and I feel like maybe 4 people is quite a lot of hands in there. But
too many cooks.
Yeah, exactly. But for 1,000 piece, it's probably okay. If it was smaller, it might be a problem.
So, Tony, remind me, is 1,000 the biggest? What's the biggest puzzle you have ever done?
Me, myself, I've only gone up to a 2,000 piece.
Okay, well, that seems like a lot. How big do they get?
I think the biggest in the world is something like 60,000 pieces.
Wow.
But I think in shops, probably the biggest you'd find would be a 5,000.
Do you get refreshment and toilet breaks and all the rest of it during this time where you sat with your puzzle?
I don't actually know. I don't think so. Well, I think if you wanted to, you just would, but the clock would just keep going.
So tell me, brain food, carbo loading, any of the other stuff that goes with sport and games, what are you doing with that?
Oh, we have actually talked about that because the competition starts at 9.
Yeah.
And obviously then we're not going to be able to eat until 1. So we have got to get up and have a good breakfast so that we don't get hungry and have to leave the table halfway through.
Or hangry with each other, because that wouldn't be great either.
Oh, no, exactly.
What do you reckon a good breakfast is when you're using your brain like that to put together a puzzle?
I don't know. I think we're probably just going to have like a usual normal breakfast, like some muesli and fruit.
Okay, good. This is all good. This is all good to know because there'll be people out there who want to give it a crack. I mean, this is your first competition. Did you realise it was such a big thing?
So we had kind of done some Googling, some deep diving of puzzle competitions, and I think we realised it was big, but I didn't expect it to be as big here. I kind of thought it would be a few entries, but they're both full.
Yes, I noticed that they were closed because otherwise Checkpoint would have probably been in the queue to get a team in there too, Tony. Hey, I wish you the best of luck. I think that's going to be amazing to see. That is puzzler Tony Kennedy. She's going to be in the Masters game. I didn't know puzzling was a thing, Evie. Not like that.
I love puzzling.
Highly competitive.
Love puzzling, but I don't want to do it fast. I want to take my time.
Okay, soak in the moment. 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 1,000-piece puzzle. What could you do? Scientists believe they have solved the mystery of a very annoying summer occurrence. Picture this. You want a bit of air of an early evening so you can casually open the window. Insects swarm in and start buzzing crazily around your light source. Scientists now think they know why this happens and they're abuzz with their findings in the journal Nature Communications. The BBC's Terry Egan has the details.
It's long been known that artificial light attracts flying insects. There are even records from the Roman Empire describing the use of light to trap them. The reason, though, has never really been clear, with previous research suggesting insects may be interpreting such light as an escape route, or that the moon has some role to play. Now, though, researchers have used high-speed infrared cameras under a range of light conditions to look at what's happening. Insects can't measure gravity while they're flying, so they solve the dilemma by using the direction of light. With natural light, that's no problem. The sky is above them and they can orientate themselves using the horizon. But when it comes to artificial light, say the scientists, insects confuse that light with up. It means they're continually correcting the course of their flight, so their backs face towards the light, which they think is up there somewhere, and their fronts towards where they think gravity is. But because they're wrong about all of that, the imbalance leads them into all sorts of weird flight paths. It's why, to us, the insects seem so erratic, even, you might say, a bit lightheaded. It's also why, as we buzz about our own business, they can be so annoying to us humans.
That's such an annoying sound. Mosquitoes buzzing around at the moment. Can't stand the things. Any tips, please? 2101 on text. You've been getting in touch about the athletes who have won the right to collectively bargain with High Performance Sport New Zealand. At the London Olympics, this person says the daily allowances for administrators was more than the athletes. Who's doing the work, they ask. Previous sports minister was advised of all of this. Little changed, they reckon. Kara's got in touch to say, I thought athletes were not paid to participate in the Olympics, so why would cyclists be seeking payment by collective bargaining? If these athletes were to be paid, would they be allowed to participate in the Commonwealth or Olympic Games? Someone may be able to help us with an answer to that one, Kara. Another person says, get rid of High Performance New Zealand and don't pay athletes. They can fund it themselves. Good grief, that is shocking. Another person says, I hope all their costs of their sport are covered on top of that. I can earn 40 to 50,000 being a support worker. I think they put in huge hours, says that person. Puzzles have got you thinking too. One listener says, please ask your interviewee for tips on doing skies in a puzzle. I am so sorry I didn't get that in time, but let's crowdsource it. 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. This fellow puzzler wants some tips for how you attack a big skyscape in a puzzle. Dark sky, I understand, is also very hard to know where the pieces are coming from.
In colour and in shape.
Yeah. And this one too, a few years ago in a hobby shop in Sydney, saw several jigsaws of 16,000 pieces, too large for our table, so we left them there, says Stuart. Yeah, that is the thing. I'm not sure where you're supposed to sort of leave them while you do them. On the subject of Wellington's water woes, and they are big, Sharon has got in touch to say, I am a Wellingtonian and I fully support stopping the Golden Mile improvements and putting the money into fixing the pipes. But at the same time, I would rather they pause the town hall upgrade and put that money into the pipes as well. It's kind of like moving the chess pieces around a little bit, isn't it? Sharon goes on to say, it is obscene that we lose 40% of our precious drinking water by leaks. I reported the leak on my street before Christmas, and each day I have to see the water draining away unnecessarily. Sharon, does that mean the leak is still going, even though it was there before Christmas? Let us know, 2101 on text. On buy now, pay later schemes, a listener says, I work in social housing. People are going into debt buying nappies and meat and then can't rent houses due to a bad credit rating. And this one, they say that this piece of legislation, the Consumer Contracts Act, protected vulnerable consumers from loan sharks and other unscrupulous lenders by requiring vendors to verify that consumers could afford payments on debt they were getting into. Previously, many people got caught in expensive car loans or debt to payday lenders.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The Commerce Minister is worried buy now pay later schemes are too easy to access by people already in debt, but says that for now he's monitoring the situation. Some people have been using the schemes to buy Prezi cards and then using those to shop for essentials like groceries. Andrew Bailey told Checkpoint he's considering options before legislation passed under the previous government comes into force in September.
The real issue is we've got a cost of living crisis and people are looking for credit from any sources they can get. And the buy now, pay later is one of those avenues where they can get access to credit and obviously build up a debt profile that's really unattractive.
Andrew Bailey says he hasn't become less concerned about the issue since coming into government and is asking for advice on it. Wellington's rates could go up by more than 15% to help fix the city's ailing water pipe network. At a policy workshop today, council staff recommended a $1.1 billion water infrastructure upgrade. Mayor Tori Whanau acknowledged the potential cost to ratepayers.
We've had decades. Previous councils have lowered rates. Unfortunately, that's impacted our city in a negative way. We now have water infrastructure that requires so much more funding, so we're going to have to pay for that now so that it doesn't impact our future generation.
Councillors will vote on the draft long-term plan on February the 15th. Visa holders are being warned about a growing number of phishing scammers pretending to be immigration officers. CertNZ says the phone calls begin with an automated voice claiming that the person being called may have visa issues. Language options in English and Chinese are then offered, and if Chinese is selected, the scammer requests personal and financial information. Analyst Sam Leggett says it's not surprising this is happening at a time of record immigration.
In this case of this phone call scam particularly, we also saw over 400 reports of this towards the end of last year, which is a record number of reports for an individual instance of an immigration scam. So certainly that's an example of this kind of activity increasing.
The UN's humanitarian coordinator for Gaza, Sigrid Kaag, says no single organisation can replace the Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA. Several donor countries have suspended funding to the agency in light of allegations by Israel that some UNRWA staff took part in the Hamas attack on Israel in October. The US ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, says UNRWA would need to reform before Washington, its biggest donor, resumed funding.
We shouldn't let that cloud the great work that UNRWA does. UNRWA has provided essential humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, and UNRWA is the only organization on the ground that has the capacity to continue to provide that assistance.
Linda Thomas-Greenfield says the US is seeking more detail from Israel about the allegations. In its latest economic outlook update, the International Monetary Fund says the global economy is on course for recovery this year and next. It predicts global growth of 3.1% this year and slightly higher next year. More on this from the BBC's Leanna Byrne.
In spite of challenges from the coronavirus pandemic, geopolitical tensions and rising costs, many economies around the world were actually pretty resilient in the second half of 2023. There was stronger than expected growth in major economies, and inflation is declining faster than expected in most regions thanks to pandemic supply chain issues mostly being resolved and central banks' restrictive policies. But this all comes with a cautionary note. Commodity price spikes from geopolitical shocks, like the attacks in the Red Sea, could prolong high interest rates, and borrowing costs remain high.
Meanwhile, two of the world's biggest tech companies, Microsoft and Alphabet, have released quarterly earning figures that exceed economists' forecasts. Buoyed by its new artificial intelligence features, Microsoft recorded an 18% rise in revenue in the 3 months ending in December. Its earnings were surpassed by Alphabet, Google's parent company, which generated revenue of $86 billion. The Postal Workers Union will begin talks with NZ Post this week to try to save the jobs of hundreds of posties. Last year, the Postal Service announced it would cut 750 mail delivery jobs in the next 5 years. Union President John Maynard says the company has since confirmed no posties will be employed by NZ Post after that deadline. Instead, all delivery of parcels and mail will be done by contractors. Mr Maynard says that leaves workers vulnerable without paid annual or sick leave or any protection under the Employment Relations Act. A grass fire in Seddon covered 25 hectares near the coast in South Marlborough today before being contained. FEN's Nelson Marlborough Group Manager, Chris Hales, says 3 helicopters and firefighters from 7 brigades worked fast to stop it from spreading further.
We're just in the mop-up phase, so just extinguishing small hotspots. Fence posts didn't get deep-seated, thankfully, because it's all pretty much grassland and vineyard development that it's burnt through, and into some smaller tree lines, which, we'll keep working on for the next few hours until it's completely out.
The fire is thought to have been sparked by an old burn-off that hadn't been properly extinguished. And more parts of Canterbury will move into a restricted fire season from midnight tonight as the dry summer continues. Fire and Emergency says that under restrictions for the mid and South Canterbury plains and coastal zones, anyone wanting to light an open-air fire will need a permit. Other areas of the mid and South Canterbury districts remain in a prohibited fire season. Koinanga Pita Kōrero. That's the news.
Tomorrow after 1 p.m, what sport was first played in New Zealand in 1871 in Dunedin? Well, Grant Morris tells me it's golf, and he gives us a special lesson on the history of golf in this country, including its golden age in the late 20th century. Plus, we're playing Link 3, and in our sporting history segment, what does it take to become a world champion trampolinist? Olympic medalist Dylan Schmidt tells me about the ups and downs on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan from 1 p.m. tomorrow on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland to Taumarunui, including Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mainly fine, isolated showers this afternoon and evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy. Showers clearing this evening, isolated showers tomorrow afternoon and evening. Taranaki to Kapiti Coast, including Taihape, mainly fine. Cloud increasing tomorrow evening with a few showers in Taranaki and south of Palmerston North. Wellington and Waitangi, partly cloudy, isolated showers in Waitangi. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, fine in Nelson. Cloudy periods in Bulla and Westland with the chance of a shower today and a few showers there tomorrow. Fiordland, rain developing this evening, clearing for a time tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, isolated showers mainly during the afternoons and evenings, possibly heavy and thundery about Canterbury and eastern Otago. Southland, fine but scattered rain developing tonight, and looking at Chatham Islands, periods of rain easing to a few showers tomorrow evening. It is coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi Evie, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Undercover Israeli forces disguised as medical staff have shot dead 3 alleged Palestinian militants in a hospital in the West Bank city of Jenin. CCTV footage shows members of an armed unit making their way through a corridor with rifles raised. The hospital says the 3 men were shot at close range in their beds as they slept. The Israeli military claim the men were using the hospital to hide while they were planning an attack. The BBC's Lucy Williamson reports.
A building with a mission to heal the sick. Visitors with a mission to kill. Israeli forces in headscarves and medical coats, filmed on security camera at the heart of Jenin's Ibn Sina hospital. Guns in one hand, handbag, baby cot in the other. Here to assassinate a patient and his 2 companions, fighters with armed Palestinian groups.
At dawn today, a military operation was carried out inside the hospital. 3 people were martyred, including a patient who was injured a month ago and was being treated in the rehabilitation unit. They targeted his room, and all the occupants were killed.
On the 3rd floor, they killed Basil Ghazawi in his bed as he slept. His brother Mohammed shot in a chair. Both fighters in Jenin's resistance groups. A 3rd man, Mohammed Jalamni, was a key Hamas figure, wanted by Israel, who says he was armed with this gun and hiding in the hospital, and that the group had been planning an imminent terrorist attack. Israel has also targeted hospitals in its war with Hamas in Gaza, arguing that Hamas makes them legitimate targets by hiding there. And today, more detail from Israel's government on its accusation that the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency is a front for Hamas and that some of its staff took part in the 7th of October attacks.
6 UNRWA employees infiltrated Israel in the attack. Not only does the evidence show that UNRWA staff were involved in the massacre, they were also directly implicated in holding hostages once they were in Gaza.
Israel says the agency, its shelters, schools and food aid should be defunded. Aid workers say Gaza's humanitarian crisis is already slipping out of control. Miriam and her 7 children are living without a proper tent or food on a beach at the southern tip of Gaza. A roadside cart for sweets, now beachside housing for a baby. Adults and infants alike, dependent on others for food and shelter, dependent on others to stop the war.
Meanwhile, the UN Security Council has expressed concern about what it calls the dire and rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza. More than half of Gaza's buildings have been damaged or destroyed since Israel launched its military offensive in retaliation for the Hamas massacre on the 7th of October. More now from the BBC's Caroline Hawley.
Aid agencies have repeatedly warned of the scale of suffering and destruction in Gaza. Now, new satellite imagery reveals the true extent of it, with whole residential neighbourhoods in ruins, once bustling streets, now silent. The analysis estimates that between 50 to 61% of all buildings in the Gaza Strip have been badly damaged or destroyed. This includes 38,000 buildings in the southern city of Khan Yunis alone. Corey Sher of City University of New York has analysed images from a range of war zones.
The extent and pace of damage is remarkable. I've never seen this much damage appear so quickly. Satellite radar indicated damage appear so quickly. And in that sense, it really stands out.
And it's not just buildings. BBC Verify has examined images which show large areas of farmland in the north and centre of Gaza laid waste. The IDF says Hamas tunnel entrances and rocket launch sites had been found in some agricultural areas, and it's repeatedly accused Hamas of embedding itself in built-up areas. But there have been allegations of deliberate destruction, including of a university blown up earlier this month in what appears to have been a controlled explosion after it had been used by Israel as a military base. The UN says 85% of Gaza's population has now been displaced by the war. Many people are now camped out close to the Egyptian border. Seen from the air, the site covers about 3.5 square kilometres, a sprawling tent city of hunger and despair.
It's 13 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan has been sentenced to 10 years in jail. The Pakistan government says he leaked state secrets, but he says it's a joke. His trial took place behind closed doors in a prison, and his political party says it will appeal against the verdict. The BBC's Caroline Davis has more.
This is Imran Khan's second jail sentence. He's already in prison after being convicted on a different charge in August. This case relates to his appearance at a rally in 2022, a month before he was ousted from power in a vote of no confidence. He appeared on stage waving a piece of paper that he said showed a foreign conspiracy against him. He didn't name the country, but was subsequently highly critical of America. The prosecution said that Mr. Khan's actions amounted to leaking a classified document and damaging diplomatic relations. The latter can lead to life imprisonment or the death penalty. Both Mr. Khan and his former Foreign Secretary Shah Mahmood Qureshi were sentenced to 10 years. Imran Khan's sister Alima Khan said that they would appeal.
Do I look worried? No. This is the fight. Imran said this is about justice. That's why he is in jail now. They will not break any law, they'll stay put, and they'll fight all the cases. People shouldn't turn to violence, but we're here to use all the legal ways to fight this.
Imran Khan was already disqualified from running in Pakistan's general elections due to take place in less than 2 weeks' time. But there are candidates running with the backing of his party. The question now is whether this new sentencing will dent the morale of his supporters or encourage more of them to turn out to vote.
To Australia now, where the government is under fire from both ends of the political spectrum over its proposed tax cuts. The Albanese administration is trying to pressure opposition parties into supporting the cuts, insisting the vast majority of Australians will be better off. Meanwhile, Australia's Greens, whose support is possibly key in getting the revamped cuts past the Senate, are again pushing for the package to be changed. The ABC's political reporter Evelyn Manfield reports.
With federal parliament returning next week, the government's planned shake-up of income tax cuts is about to face a new test. Here's Greens leader Adam Bandt.
we're looking at ways of fixing Labor's plan so that low and middle income earners get more. We also want Labor to justify why they're spending $84 billion on tax cut for the top end when that money could go, for example, towards getting dental into Medicare.
With Labor possibly looking to the crossbench to get its tax changes through the Senate, the Greens are using analysis they've obtained from the Parliamentary Budget Office to show the 20% of lowest paid workers will only share $100 million of the $23 billion in cuts in the first year, with the highest paid workers getting the lion's share, a reason they say to make some more adjustments.
These are Liberal light tax cuts that still benefit the wealthy and leave everyday people behind. It may well be something that Peter Dutton and the Liberals end up voting for because the top 20% still get 50% of the benefit.
And while the coalition's coy about whether it'll support Labor's changes, the government's trying some persuasion of its own, claiming 85% of taxpayers in coalition-held electorates, including opposition leader Peter Dutton's Queensland seat of Dickson, will be better off than under the already legislated coalition-era tax cuts.
I think the sensible thing for the coalition to do would be to support this package, because the optics of not supporting it would be quite difficult.
Mark Kenny is a professor of politics at the Australian National University.
I think what's actually been underplayed in a lot of this debate so far is the extent of pressure that comes on the opposition, because just as Labor was wedged in 2019 when the coalition government put up the three stages and said we're not going to separate them, has to be voted on as a package. The coalition now is faced with a situation where if it votes against this change, it will be voting against tax cuts for 11 million Australians, better tax cuts than they were going to get.
The official line from the coalition is that its position will be made clear in due course, but some, including the LNP's Warren Entsch, don't want to be seen as getting in the way of the cuts.
We can't change the decision that's been made by the Prime Minister, and you don't want to stand in the way of it. That's my personal view, and it's one that I will express. I see it as a short-term political fix in the eyes of the government and the Prime Minister. And he's selling it that way. I mean, he's obviously conscious of the fact that there'll be an election in the next 12 months or so. But it does not address the problems that we have, particularly in relation to bracket creep.
The final test of who will oppose or support the tax cuts will come when they're put to a vote in Parliament.
And inflation has come in lower than expected in Australia, with prices rising just 0.6% over the December quarter and 4.1% over the past year. It's good news for Australian consumers who have battled with a cost of living crisis, but retailers predict there's more tough times ahead. The ABC's Angus Randall has more.
It's been an expensive few months for families. First Christmas and then back to school costs. In Adelaide's Rundle Mall, shoppers are counting their pennies.
Bills and everything just seems to be going up and not the pay, so.
Have you found yourself spending a bit less over the Christmas period?
Probably not really personally, much to my detriment. I probably should have.
We actually cut down on family presents and decided to do like kids-only presents rather than whole family presents.
Much less this year actually than previous years, so we cut down by about 25%. Yeah, presents and food.
Figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics released this week showed a modest increase in retail sales of just 0.8% in December. It's subdued for the festive season and a significant drop on November's figures that were boosted by Black Friday sales. The Australian Retailers Association's Fleur Brown is expecting a tough few months ahead.
It is a sort of batten down the hatches year. I think we're certainly, in discussions with retailers and also in terms of setting expectations, looking at, the latter half of this year before we see any sort of bright side in, consumer relief.
The flatlining spending has already claimed one victim. Vacuum seller Godfrey's went into voluntary administration yesterday after nearly a century in business. In a statement, the business blamed high inflation, rising interest rates and falling consumer spending. Jordan Mumford is the Assistant Secretary of the Retail Workers Union in South Australia.
This sort of part of the retail sector is being particularly hit, and that's because consumers don't have discretionary capacity. People are buying the basic goods, they're filling up the car at the Bowser and buying food to eat, but people are putting up with a broken vacuum cleaner maybe for months or years because it's just not at the top of their priority list. And of course, that's having a negative impact on companies like this one.
The inflation and retail spending figures will be just some of the markers discussed by the New Look Reserve Bank Board in its first meeting of the year next week. From February, the Bank Board will meet 8 times a year for 2 days each. Most economists are predicting the interest rate will hold before being cut in the second half of the year. Fleur Brown from the Retailers Association is hoping we've seen the last rate rise for a while.
Look, it is a pivotal moment, not just because it will affect spending very directly, but also because it will affect confidence. And by confidence, I mean both consumer confidence and business confidence. So whatever the decision is, and we're very hopeful that it will be at least, a hold decision, there will be a ripple effect for the rest of the year. It kind of sets the tone, what the expectation might be for this year.
ANZ economist Adelaide Timbrell says the retail data is encouraging for anyone dreading another hike on their mortgage.
The retail sales figures are really supportive of the Reserve Bank not having to hike. We're seeing that real transmission of monetary policy into households where it's leading to households being more careful about their spending. When households are more careful about their spending, they're less likely to say yes to price increases from businesses and more likely to walk away from price increases. When you're more likely to walk away, businesses are more likely to not increase their price, even if the cost of business is going up. And that is what the Reserve Bank wants. They want to see prices stay as stable as possible.
The Reserve Bank meets from Monday and will announce any changes to the cash rate on Tuesday.
Tech billionaire Elon Musk claims his neurotech company, Neuralink, has successfully implanted its first brain chip in a human. The initial goal of the brain-computer interface is to allow people to control devices using only their thoughts. Similar trials are happening around the globe, but Mr. Musk's long-term plans have some neuroethicists worried. Here's the ABC's Rachel Hayter.
The patient, Elon Musk says, is recovering well. A device the size of a large coin has been implanted on their skull with ultra-thin wires threaded through to the brain. The product from the company Neuralink is called telepathy.
The idea is to be able to control a smartphone or a computer by thinking.
Dr. Laura Cabrera is an associate professor of neuroethics at Pennsylvania State University. She believes the device could transform the lives of people with catastrophic injuries.
There are clearly patients that would benefit from having a technology that allows them to communicate back to the external world. So people with paraplegia or quadriplegia.
When Neuralink got approval from the US medical regulator, the Food and Drug Administration, last year, they started recruiting people with cervical spinal cord injury or ALS. But Dr. Cabrera is worried the tech entrepreneur has more dangerous long-term ambitions.
Elon Musk has not been shy in saying that he wants his company to be able to go beyond just medical applications.
On his social media platform X, Mr. Musk writes, "Imagine if Stephen Hawking could communicate faster than a speed typist or auctioneer. That is the goal."
He wants us to be able to interface with AI and just sort of be able to engage with the streams of data that are constantly hitting us. Quite science fiction-y stuff.
Sally Addy is the author of We Are Electric, the new science of our body's electrome. She says similar implants are already being trialled on patients around the world. A company in Switzerland enabled a paralysed man to walk just by thinking. Electronic implants on his brain and spine, wirelessly communicating thoughts to his legs and feet.
It's very small. It's limited to one very tiny area of the brain. It reads from a collection of neurons there, hundreds, maybe a couple of hundred. What he wants is something that will read from all over the brain and just tap into way more of our 86 billion neurons.
But Mr. Musk would need further FDA approvals for that. Professor Tara Spires-Jones is president of the British Neuroscience Association. And while the Neuralink trial is in its early stages, she's hopeful it will help patients with movement or speech problems.
One of the studies I read could only accurately interpret 50% of the words someone was thinking. So it's not perfect yet, but it's part of the direction the field is going. So just this idea that understanding the brain in neuroscience and bringing that together with artificial intelligence and computers is really going to, I think, start making a difference in people's lives.
Bradley Gregor from the Brain Centre at Arizona State University University describes the successful surgery as charting new territory for brain-computer interfaces.
That's a big deal. That is a monumental achievement, honestly. But the real proof in the pudding is going to come from where are we at 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. If the device continues to function well on that time frame, now the landscape has changed.
And telepathy has a substantial clinical trial period ahead before it hits the shelves.
Boeing is expected to face intense scrutiny from investors tomorrow. The aviation giant is due to publish its results for the past year. It comes weeks after a door plug blew off its 737 MAX 9, forcing it to make an emergency landing. Now, Boeing and its boss, David Cullen, face deep questions about the plane maker's future. The BBC's Michelle Fleury has more.
Boeing 737 MAX 9 returned to service last Friday. This Alaska Airlines flight leaving Seattle for San Diego was full, weeks after a door panel blew out on another MAX plane in its fleet mid-flight. Passenger Virginia Cavney was on her way to see her family.
Thoughts go through your mind, but you have to hope that people learn from their mistakes.
Boeing's boss, David Calhoun, acknowledged the company's shortcomings, a message he took to Capitol Hill last week when he met with senators.
We're going to talk about transparency and responsibility, and that'll be it. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
For Michael Stumo, it's not good enough.
This is a Boeing leadership problem.
His daughter, Samia Rose Stumo, was killed when a 737 MAX 8 crashed in Ethiopia a year after a similar crash in Indonesia.
We sent a letter with 1,100 signatures from crash family victims and friends of victims' families and friends of families to the Senate, asking them to investigate Boeing leadership, to reveal how bad they are or not, but investigate the leadership and their ability to drive quality through the organization.
As Boeing prepares to face investors, it's still under pressure from regulators and customers. The FAA is limiting how many 737 MAX planes it can make, and one of its biggest customers, United, is rethinking its options. The American carrier is rumoured to be in talks with Boeing rival Airbus. Despite the safety crisis, a lawyer for family members of passengers killed on a MAX plane in Ethiopia says Boeing is too big to fail.
Take a look at Boeing and its importance to the American defense infrastructure. It's a very big deal. And so we for a lot of reasons, we want Boeing to succeed. But at the moment, they're failing us all miserably.
Boeing and its best-selling plane may not be in danger of going bust. But with the investigation ongoing, it won't be business as usual.
All right, before we head off, some puzzling advice. Get a pen and paper. I think it's complicated, but apparently if you're doing big skyscapes or single-coloured puzzles that are very difficult, experienced puzzle users divide pieces into small piles with similar colours, patterns and shapes. All the blue sky pieces with 2 holes and 2 knobs go together in one pile, or blue sky pieces with 3 knobs and 1 hole go together in another, etc., etc. So you divide them up so that they're the same together. And then you go searching for matching partners by visualising the negative space. Oh, simple. And apparently it saves you from wasting time considering puzzle pieces that don't match the profile you were looking for if you divide them into these separate piles. I hope that helps. I'm not sure it does because it just makes my head hurt. And Sharon's got in touch about her leak. She reported it in December, she says, in Wellington outside her place. And yep, she says the leak on my street is still leaking and has been marked as a medium priority. Yeah, well, medium, not moving very quickly, are they? If you missed anything on Checkpoint, you can check us out on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up. They flip-flop over whether jandals are okay for the office. What do you reckons on that one? What about bare feet? You know, we had the whole shorts debate. We're getting, well, less and less coverage. Tune in for that one, 5 a.m. tomorrow. We'll catch you a little later in the day.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The Employment Relations Authority says government agency High Performance Sport is legally obliged to engage in collective bargaining with an athletes' cooperative. Champion Olympic rower Mahe Drysdale told Checkpoint athletes are looking forward to improving their pay and conditions. The Commerce Minister is worried buy now pay later schemes are too easy for people already in debt to access. Wellington's rates could go up by more than 15% if councillors approve a recommended $1.1 billion water infrastructure upgrade. And the Postal Workers Union is to begin talks with NZ Post to save 750 delivery jobs over the next 5 years. NZ Post wants to move to delivery contractors instead of employees. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia ora, it's me, Emile Donovan from The Night Show. Last night, we chatted with an Italian chef about all things olive oil, and it went pretty much as you'd expect.
Oil is like petrol for the car. Without that, you don't do anywhere. I grew up with olive oil, and so for me, it's like a blood for the human being. Wherever I do, wherever we do, we use olive oil.
You can catch that at rnz.co.nz/nights and tune in for tonight's program from 7 here on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Hello, you're with me, Evie Ashton, through to 7 o'clock tonight on Trending Now. And we begin, as we often do, with the detail. There's growing fear and anger from Māori over moves by the coalition government to revisit the rules around Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, the fight over the Treaty of Waitangi.
Te Tiriti o Waitangi is sacrosanct.
There's no question about this. This is an attempt to abolish the Treaty of Waitangi.
I sense that the mania that gripped iwi in the seabed and foreshore is starting to trickle through over the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi.
We don't expect to be just spoken to. We want the opportunity to be walking side by side and working with you.
Actually, Māori and non-Māori have been consulted, but ACT is opposed to treating people differently based on their race.
David Seymour wants a referendum over the treaty principles.
ACT's policy, which has been set out in great details in our document, is to redefine the principles of the treaty.
But Prime Minister Christopher Luxon has repeatedly said it won't get beyond the first reading.
There is no commitment to take it beyond that.
So you won't rule out voting for it?
Well, there is no commitment to take it beyond that, and I'd just say as the national leader, our position has been well understood for a long period of time.
But it's more than ACT's bill that's causing so much anger. It is the new coalition government's moves to cut the use of te reo Māori in public life, back away from co-governance, and roll back plans for greater Māori control over their health services.
Repeal this, disestablish that, abolish this, all in the negative framing of the language. What is the plan, Prime Minister?
So, 184 years after the creation of the treaty, what does that document really mean for our country? And what would getting rid of the principles mean? Lawyer Carwyn Jones of Ngāti Kahungunu has worked at the Waitangi Tribunal, the Māori Land Court and the Office of Treaty Settlements. He now teaches Māori law and philosophy at Te Wānanga o Raukawa at Ōtaki. And he admits he's been taken aback by how swiftly things have developed in the last 6 months.
In fact, I had some media interviews with folks from Australia ahead of their The Voice referendum. They were asking me about whether there was any challenge to Te Tiriti and its role in New Zealand law or public life. When I was talking with them, I said, well, we have the ACT Party who are proposing this referendum, but none of the other major parties seem at all interested. I was of the impression that we weren't going to be going as far in terms of the policy program that the government has laid out, which I think is taking us back a long way in terms of Māori issues in Te Tiriti in particular.
What is your feeling about the way things are? Is it alarm? Is it anger?
Anger to some extent, I suppose. Certainly in many of the hui that I've been in since the government's coalition agreements have been announced, there has been a real anger at the government in terms of stepping back from its obligations under Te Tiriti. Where I'm from in Wairoa, we've been through the treaty settlement process, which we thought was establishing a kind of new platform, new relationship for the government to work with us in accordance with Te Tiriti, and yet what we see now is the government trying to step back from certainly how it understands its obligations under Te Tiriti. I do feel a certain amount of anger at the government taking us backwards in that way. However, this is not a situation which is really unfamiliar to Māori. We know that often we are used as political footballs in elections and in politics. We know that we are able to come together and resist, and as some people have said, our kind of continued existence is resistance.
Should we take it back a bit? Because, the whole idea of this podcast is to try and understand a bit more about the treaty, what it is and what it means. And I just wondered, when you talk about the treaty, how do you explain what it is?
I often start actually by taking a step back from Te Tiriti itself and talking about the Declaration of Independence, which was a document from 1835, which was signed by Māori rangatira in the north. So that Declaration of Independence, he whakaputanga, the rangatira declare that Aotearoa is an independent state. They use the Māori they use as whenua rangatira. And who is responsible for holding sovereignty, or the rangatira say it's us collectively. And importantly, they say us and only us. We are the only ones who exercise authority here in Aotearoa. So that's the context then in which we come just 5 years later, in 1840, to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. For me, there are really two big ideas, but we know there are 3 articles and they each have something important in them. But when we think about what a treaty is, we know that a treaty is an agreement between 2 or more sovereign parties. And what we would expect to see is that there's some benefit for both parties who are entering into this. That's why you enter into an agreement. So when we look at Article 1, we can see essentially that's really dealing with what the British Crown is getting out of this agreement. And in the Māori text, that talks about giving the authority of kāwanatanga to the British Crown. And so it's kāwanatanga derives actually from an English word, kāwana, governor, kāwanatanga, those things to do with the governor or government, we might say. Mm. Now, what is really important about this is that is a big shift from the context we had with the Declaration of Independence, where the Declaration said only the rangatira exercise authority here in Aotearoa. Te Tiriti is saying, well, actually, we're going to open up space for the British Crown to exercise authority over its own people who are here in Aotearoa. And so that session is a session of the authority to manage British subjects who are here. And that's why the Waitangi Tribunal, for example, has been really clear about that's not a session of sovereignty. Māori weren't giving up their own rights and political authority over their own people, but we're saying we can create a space for the British Crown to exercise authority over its own subjects. And you can see then that's consistent with what's guaranteed in Article 2, which is the tino rangatiratanga for Māori. So that, again, the base word is rangatira, so chief, rangatiratanga, chieftainship, tino rangatiratanga, tino is an intensifier, so it's all those very special qualities of chieftainship or absolute chieftainship. And so that's being guaranteed to Māori. So we have a situation where you have these 2 spheres of influence or authority that are being set up, kāwanatanga and tino rangatiratanga. And what Te Tiriti says is that both of those spheres of authority, spheres of influence are going to be able to operate here in Aotearoa. And of course, the 3rd article dealing with ensuring a kind of promise to Māori that they would also have all the rights and privileges of British subjects as well. So it's an agreement between Māori, the rangatira who signed on behalf of their hapu or iwi, and the British Crown for this shared authority in Aotearoa.
David Seymour's promise of a referendum looking at the principles of the treaty is seen as a dismantling of that.
Yes, so the principles of the treaty has been a kind of legal mechanism by which Māori have been able to achieve some measure of influence or to give some effect to the promises or the guarantees in te tiriti. But I want to stress that the principles are different from te tiriti itself, and the principles are something which have been created by our Parliament. So, often we hear David Seymour talk about the fact that Parliament hasn't had an opportunity to have a say on this. Well, it was Parliament that established this legal construct of the principles of the treaty. And the principles were really, they're the Waitangi Tribunal's jurisdiction is based around the principles of the treaty, and the Waitangi Tribunal is directed to look at both the English text and the Māori text of the treaty in order to determine and apply those principles. And so the tribunal's been at that work for nearly 50 years, and we started to see as Parliament introduced this concept of treaty principles into other pieces of legislation, we've started to see that come up in the ordinary courts as well. And so particularly from the late 1980s onwards, we've seen our the High Court, Court of Appeal and now Supreme Court dealing with this question of the principles of the treaty.
I mean, if we don't have the principles of the treaty, what does that mean for so many things? Like, for example, employment contracts or public service contracts or tenders. Will there be a direct impact on things like that?
Yeah, so I think one of the really complicated things about what is being proposed is that if you start to change the kind of settled understanding or meaning of the principles of the treaty as a legal technical term, then that does have an impact on the meaning of a whole lot of pieces of legislation. And as you say, there are other policy documents and sometimes employment agreements too, which will refer to that phrase as well and use it as a legally defined term. And so that would create a whole lot of uncertainty as the courts would have to then re-engage and say, well, okay, we know that this term, the principles of the treaty, Parliament have directed us to give meaning to it, which is different to the meaning that we've been applying for the last nearly 40 years.
If it gets all the way, does that mean that we'd have to start again with a lot of legislation?
Well, it would mean that the meaning and application of a whole range of legislation would become uncertain, because this clearly the government would be indicating we've got a new definition for what treaty principles are, a definition which I might add doesn't really bear much relationship to the text of te tiriti itself or even to the way the principles have been applied for the last 40 years. And we saw that in the leaked Ministry of Justice paper, that comment was made.
The legal document from the Ministry of Justice, leaked to One News, warns the government's proposed principles are at odds with both the spirit and text of the treaty. One example is the Coalition's version of Article 2, which says the government will honour all New Zealanders in the chieftainship of their land and property. But the leaked document says that was an exclusive agreement between the Crown and Māori.
It would mean that the application of all those pieces of legislation, and we're talking about some major pieces of legislation like the Conservation Act, for example, has a really strong treaty principles provision in it. But there's a huge range that the meaning of those treaty principles clauses would become uncertain because there's this new definition, but the courts would have to work through, well, how do we apply that new interpretation in a way which is consistent with the statute, our other principles of statutory interpretation, also what our other precedent has been, even though that's been working in a different context in terms of not having a specific definition from Parliament about what those principles are.
Can you be a bit more specific about what kind of impact it might have on your iwi, for example?
What it means for a start is that our treaty settlement, although the government's been said, well, we're not going to interfere with treaty settlements, actually where our treaty settlement legislation refers to treaty principles, the fact that our claims that were settled were all based on the tribunal's jurisdiction of treaty principles, means that there is some concern about what that might mean about our relationships with local government or the Department of Conservation or any of the other government agencies that we have particular relationships with coming out of that settlement, about the way in which the legal framework might require them to consult with us, to take into account our particular values or associations with a particular site, if we're talking about co-management of a particular area within the conservation estate, for example. I think one of the things that came through loud and clear in our hui was that because there are so many issues within these coalition agreements, within the government's policy program, that seem to be undermining of Māori rights or an attack on te tiriti or mana motuhake or on te reo in particular, that this is being felt as a real all-out attack.
I think it's a fairly direct attack on Māori. I would say it's by far the most direct attack legally in the last 20 years, if not longer.
So we have the hui in Tūranga Waiwai and a huge turnout for it and a lot of talk about kotahitanga, unity. But the Māori King also talked about...
We need to get to some solution. It's nice to see everybody, but we don't want to just kōrero. We need a way forward that brings kotahitanga to all of Aotearoa.
So what would that solution be? What do people want?
So again, one of the things that has come through very strongly in the hui that I've been part of is to focus on mana motuhake or tino rangatiratanga, so that Māori self-determination. And so in a sense, there's been a real push to not be constrained by what the government is doing, not buy into some of the debates and the arguments and the framing of these discussions that the government is trying to establish, because they are hostile towards Māori. And rather to think about, well, what are the ways in which we can assert our own mana motuhake. There are some, very simple things that Tuheitia mentioned about how we might go about being Māori in an everyday kind of way.
Be who we are, live our values, speak our reo, care for our mokopuna, our awa, our maunga. Just be Māori. Māori all day, every day. We are here, we are strong.
For those people who are real